Don't touch that bike. You hear me? Don't you dare touch it. The wrench slipped from her fingers and clattered across the concrete floor, and every head in that workshop snapped toward her like she'd just pulled a gun. Claire Dawson, 24 years old, grease under her fingernails mop, still leaning against her hip, stood in front of a $1.5 million Harley Davidson that the best mechanics in America had already given up on. And she said the 5 words that changed everything. I know what's wrong with it. If this story moves you, hit subscribe and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning it happened, nobody was expecting a miracle. Nobody was expecting anything except another long, frustrating day of dead ends and expensive shrugs. It was the kind of September morning that feels like it's trying too hard. Bright sun, cool air. The smell of fresh-cut grass mixing with motor oil, drifting out of the open bay doors of Walker Restoration and Classics, one of the most prestigious motorcycle restoration shops in the entire state of Montana. The kind of place that had framed magazine covers on every wall. The kind of place where men who had spent 40 years with their hands inside engines still called the owner Sir. Ethan Walker was 58 years old, silver-haired, and had the kind of quiet authority that came not from shouting, but from simply knowing more than everyone else in the room. He'd built his reputation one impossible restoration at a time. He'd brought back a 1936 knucklehead from a barn fire. He'd rebuilt a 1942 military WLA using parts he'd machined himself. He'd won more awards than he had wall space to display them. But none of that prepared him for what he was looking at now. The Harley sat at the center of the main restoration bay like a patient on a hospital gurney, surrounded, examined, poked, and still utterly refusing to cooperate. It was a 1969 Harley-Davidson FLH Electroglide, but calling it that felt almost disrespectful to what it actually was. This was no ordinary FLH. This machine had been custom-built by 3 of the most celebrated craftsmen of its era, each contributing work that could no longer be replicated anywhere on Earth. The original carburetors had been hand-ported by a man who died in 1991. The primary drive had been modified using a technique that was literally undocumented. Nobody had ever written it down because the man who developed it saw no reason to. The chrome had been done by a shop in Chicago that burned down in 1978, taking every trade secret with it. And it had belonged to someone famous. Not just famous, iconic. The kind of Hollywood name that made grown collectors go quiet with reverence. A man who had ridden this specific motorcycle through 3 films and across 2 decades of American mythology. A man whose estate had sold the bike at auction for $1.5 million to Ethan Walker, who had actually wept when the gavel came down. That was 3 years ago. For 3 years, Ethan had displayed the Harley at exhibitions, shown her at rallies, let people photograph her. He'd never tried to run her. Some things he believed were beyond mere use. Some things were art. Until the day of the Billings Collectors exhibition, when he'd made the single decision he would spend months regretting. He'd decided to start her up, right there in front of 460 people. Collectors, journalists, restorers, enthusiasts who had driven from as far as Georgia and Oregon to see this machine. He'd climbed up, adjusted the choke, found the ignition, and kicked down. Nothing. A ripple of confused murmuring moved through the crowd. He kicked again. Nothing. Again. Nothing. And then the silence that fell over that exhibition hall was the worst kind of silence, the kind that has embarrassment folded inside it. The kind where 460 people are all thinking the same thing, but none of them are brave enough to say it out loud. The $1 million Harley wouldn't start. Ethan kept his composure. He kept his expression neutral. He stepped back from the bike, nodded calmly, and said to his lead mechanic, Dale Hutchins, in a voice just barely above a whisper, "Get it in the truck." That had been 6 weeks ago. In the weeks since Ethan had called in every favor he had ever accumulated in 32 years in this industry, he'd brought in Dale, who had been working on Harleys since 1979 and could read an engine the way other men read faces. He'd brought in Marcus Webb from Denver, who had a waiting list of 14 months and had never once failed to diagnose a problem. He'd brought in 2 brothers from Tennessee who ran a specialty shop focused exclusively on vintage Harley electrical systems and who charged $400 an hour between them. He'd also quietly consulted with 2 engineers from Milwaukee who had ties to the original Harley-Davidson factory archives. Men who technically weren't supposed to be consulting for independent shops, but who came anyway because Ethan Walker asked, and because this machine was legendary enough that they wanted to see it with their own eyes. Every single one of them had failed. Not for lack of trying. Dale had spent 9 consecutive days on the bike, barely sleeping running tests that left him more frustrated each morning. Marcus Webb had been so confident when he arrived, "Give me 48 hours, Ethan, I've seen worse," that his silence on day 4 had been almost more uncomfortable than the problem itself. The brothers from Tennessee had actually argued with each other in Ethan's parking lot loud enough for the whole shop to hear, each blaming the other for missing something. The Milwaukee engineers had simply looked at the readouts from the last diagnostic run, looked at each other and said, "There's nothing mechanically wrong with this engine. The problem isn't there," which was somehow the most terrifying conclusion of all, because if nothing was mechanically wrong, then what was wrong? The bike sat in the center of the main bay, now perfectly still, perfectly silent, and mocking all of them simply by existing. Ethan was sitting at his desk in the glass-walled office overlooking the shop floor when Claire came in to mop. She came in every morning at 6:30 and every evening at 5, same as always. He'd barely registered her existence until about 2 weeks ago, and even then only because Dale had pointed her out, not to be cruel exactly, but in the way men sometimes point things out when they're looking for somewhere to put their frustration. "You see the janitor," Dale had said, nodding toward where Claire was working near the back wall. "She was actually looking at the bike yesterday, like really looking at it. Spent a good 10 minutes just standing there, staring at it before I told her to get back to work." Ethan had looked up. He'd seen a young woman, blonde hair pulled back under a cap, worn jeans, a gray sweatshirt with a bleach stain on the left sleeve. She'd looked up at that exact moment, caught his eye through the glass, and looked away immediately. Probably just curious, Ethan had said, and gone back to his paperwork. He hadn't thought about it again. Until this morning. He was at his desk on the phone with his insurance carrier, discussing in the kind of diplomatic language that barely concealed the mutual frustration underneath it, the logistics of having a $1.5 million motorcycle that was not damaged, not stolen, not destroyed, but simply inexplicably non-functional. When movement on the shop floor caught his eye, Claire wasn't mopping. She was crouched beside the Harley. Not cleaning around it, not working near it. She was crouched right next to the frame, close enough to touch, and she was looking at something on the left side of the lower frame rail, just forward of the primary cover. And her head was tilted the way people's heads tilt when they see something that doesn't make sense, when the brain is working faster than the expression can keep up with. Ethan set down the phone without saying goodbye. He walked out of the office and across the shop floor, and his footsteps must have been audible because Claire started to stand immediately fast the way people stand up when they've been caught doing something they shouldn't. "I'm sorry," she said before he could say a word. I was just cleaning near it, and I noticed." "What did you notice?" Ethan said. His tone wasn't angry. It wasn't anything particularly. It was the tone of a man who had been 6 weeks without an answer and was willing to listen to literally anyone. Claire hesitated. She glanced past him toward the other end of the shop where Dale and one of his junior mechanics were working on a different bike. She lowered her voice. "The frame has been touched," she said, "right there on the lower left rail. The paint is different, not different like old and new, different, like something went under it, like someone opened something and painted over it." Ethan looked at the section of frame she was pointing to. He'd looked at this motorcycle 10,000 times over 6 weeks. He'd looked at every inch of it. He looked now, and he did not immediately see what she was describing. "The paint looks the same to me," he said. "It's not," Claire said, and then she did something that surprised him. She didn't back down. She didn't apologize again or retreat. She pointed more specifically, her finger hovering an inch from the chrome and paint. "Right there, see where the texture changes. It's just a few millimeters. The original finish has a slightly different grain than what's on top of it. Whoever did it was good, really good. But if you know what original factory finish looks like on a 69 FLH, you can see the difference." Ethan crouched down. He looked for a long time, and then something very cold moved through him because he was starting to see it. "Who are you?" he said, not unkindly, genuinely wanting to know. "Claire Dawson," she said. "I clean the floors." "I can see that," Ethan said. "That's not what I asked." She looked at him for a moment. Her jaw tightened slightly, the way people's jaws tighten when they're deciding how much to say. "My father was Ray Dawson," she said. The name landed like a stone dropping into still water. Ethan went completely still. Ray Dawson, he repeated. Yes, sir. Ethan stood up slowly. Ray Dawson had been one of the most gifted Harley restoration craftsmen in the entire Midwest. He'd been a quiet, methodical man who'd run a small shop in rural Wisconsin and who had done work so precise, so faithful to original factory specifications that other restorers had occasionally sent their most difficult projects to him rather than attempt the work themselves. Ethan had met Ray exactly once at a collector event in Indianapolis about 12 years ago and had come away from the conversation wishing he could steal him from Wisconsin and bring him to Montana. Ray Dawson had died of a heart attack 4 years ago. He'd left behind a daughter. Ethan had heard that much through the industry grapevine, along with the information that the shop had been lost to debt shortly after Ray's death. He hadn't heard what became of the daughter. Now he knew. She was standing in front of him in a bleach-stained sweatshirt, pointing at something on a $1.5 million motorcycle that 6 of the best professionals in the country had missed. You grew up working in your father's shop, Ethan said. It wasn't really a question. From the time I was 8 years old, Claire said, he taught me everything he knew, the factory specs, the original tolerances, what original finishes look like versus restorer work. He had a photographic memory for this stuff, and She stopped, pressed her lips together for a second. He was very thorough about teaching me. And you think someone modified this frame? I don't think it, Claire said. I know it. The question is what they put inside it. The shop was noisy compressors running music from Dale's speaker in the corner, the rhythmic sound of a ratchet from the other bay. Nobody was watching them. Nobody had any idea what was happening in this conversation. Ethan Walker looked at the girl, his shop floor janitor, the daughter of a man he'd considered one of the greats for a long moment. Then he said, "Show me." What happened next took 45 minutes. They moved around the bike together, Ethan asking questions, Claire answering them, pointing, explaining, and slowly, methodically walking him through everything she'd noticed over the past several weeks of mopping floors around this motorcycle and looking at it every single day from every possible angle in the way that only someone who grew up inside this world could look at it. She showed him 3 other spots where the original paint profile was inconsistent. She showed him a section near the steering neck where 2 wells didn't match the factory pattern close but not exact. She showed him a place on the right side of the frame where a small section of metal had the faintest hairline along its edge, invisible unless you knew exactly what you were looking for. Not a crack, an opening, a very, very deliberately concealed opening. There's a compartment in the frame, Claire said. I don't know what's in it, but someone built one and someone tampered with the electrical system to make sure this bike would never start again. Because if it started, it would eventually need servicing, and if it needed servicing, someone good enough might find the compartment. Ethan's hands were clasped behind his back. He was staring at the motorcycle with the expression of a man who has just been told the house he's lived in for 10 years has a room he never knew about. The electrical sabotage, he said quietly. Can you fix it? Yes, Claire said, without hesitation, without false modesty or qualification. Just yes. And the compartment, I can open it. I need a small pick tool in about 20 minutes. Ethan was quiet for a long time. Long enough that Claire shifted her weight once the only sign that she was nervous. Long enough that from across the shop, Dale happened to look up, saw Ethan standing beside the Harley with the janitor, and did a visible double take. Hold on, Dale said loud enough to carry. He put down his tool and walked over, and his face already had that particular configuration, the slight narrowing of the eyes, the chin lifted just a fraction, that it gets when a man's territory is being questioned without his permission. What's going on, he said to Ethan. And then to Claire, not quite meeting her eyes. Did something happen to the bike? You didn't touch it, did you? She's been studying this bike for weeks, Ethan said. She found something. Dale's expression shifted. She found something. Yes. She's the janitor. I'm aware of what her current position is, Dale. The words were quiet, but they had weight, and Dale heard the weight, and his expression went through several rapid adjustments before settling on something close to professional skepticism. Okay, he said, folding his arms. What did she find? Ethan stepped aside, slightly deferring to Claire. Claire looked at Dale with the kind of steady, clear-eyed composure that is either courage or the complete absence of anything left to lose, and she walked him through it. All of it. The frame modifications, the paint inconsistencies, the mismatched welds, the concealed compartment. Dale listened. He looked where she pointed. His arms uncrossed at some point, and he crouched down. He looked for a long time. Then he stood up and looked at Ethan. "If this is what she says it is," he said slowly, "then I missed it. All of us missed it." "I know," Ethan said. "She's 20-something years old and cleans our floors." "I know that too." Dale looked at Claire with an expression that was more complicated now, not hostile, not apologetic, just trying very hard to understand something that didn't fit into any category he had for the world. "Your father was Ray Dawson," he said. "Yes," Claire said. Dale said nothing for a moment. Then, "I saw his work once on a 64 panhead that came through a shop I worked at in Cheyenne. The restoration was so clean it looked factory. I didn't believe a person had done it. I thought it was a show bike that had never been ridden." "He used to say that's the whole point," Claire said. "Make it so right that it disappears." Dale looked at the Harley. He looked at Claire. "Show her what she needs," he said to Ethan, and then he walked back to his bay. It was permission, and it cost him something to give it that was visible. But he gave it anyway, and Ethan made a mental note of that and would remember it later. Ethan went to the tool cabinet and came back with the pick set. He handed it to Claire, and she accepted it the way someone accepts a familiar object naturally without awkwardness, the way tools fit differently in hands that know them. She went to work. The shop had gotten quieter. Dale's junior mechanic had drifted closer, pretending to look for something on a nearby shelf. Dale himself had not gone back to what he'd been doing. He was standing at an angle where he could see without appearing to watch. Claire worked in silence. She was precise and slow. Not slow like someone uncertain, but slow like someone who understood that this particular moment required patience over speed. Her hands moved with a confidence that didn't match the worn sweatshirt or the cleaning supplies 10 feet away, and watching her, Ethan felt something shift inside him. A recognition, the same thing he'd felt the first time he watched a truly gifted craftsman at work, that almost physical sense of witness, of watching a person be what they are meant to be. 22 minutes after she started, there was a sound, not a loud sound, a very small, precise click, like the last tumbler falling in a lock. A section of the lower left frame rail, roughly 4 inches long and 2 inches wide, shifted almost imperceptibly. A concealed panel fitting so perfectly into the surrounding metal that it was essentially invisible. Claire looked up at Ethan. He nodded. She carefully lifted the panel free. Inside the compartment, it tightly wrapped in oilcloth that had preserved them perfectly against the decades, were documents, papers, folded carefully several layers deep, and a small metal case no bigger than a cigarette box, sealed with a simple latch. Ethan reached in and lifted them out. His hands were not quite steady. He unfolded the top document. He read the first 3 lines, and the color left his face. "What is it?" Dale's voice came from right behind them, and Ethan realized Dale had walked over without anyone noticing, pulled in by the gravity of the moment like everything else in the room. Ethan didn't answer immediately. He kept reading. His expression had gone very still in a way that Claire recognized from years of watching her father's face as the expression of a person absorbing information that is simultaneously unbelievable and completely undeniably real. Finally, Ethan looked up. He looked at Claire. He looked at Dale. He looked back at the document. "This bike," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "has been carrying evidence of one of the largest collector fraud operations in American history." The compressors were still running. The music was still playing from Dale's speaker. The ordinary sounds of the shop continued exactly as before. But the air in that bay had changed completely. Claire looked at the documents in Ethan's hands. She looked at the open compartment in the frame of the motorcycle that nobody had been able to fix, that she had fixed in front of people who hadn't believed she could, and something about the expression on Ethan's face told her that what she'd walked into was no longer just a story about a broken Harley. It was something much larger, and it had, whether she wanted it to or not, already put her name on it. Dale said very quietly, "We need to be careful about who we tell." Ethan nodded. Claire said nothing. She was looking at the motorcycle. She was thinking about her father, about the hours he'd spent showing her how to see what other people missed, how to look past the surface to what was underneath, how to trust her hands and her eyes, when everyone around her trusted neither. She'd walked into this shop 6 months ago with nothing. No credentials, no references, no money, just the knowledge her father had spent 16 years pressing into her hands and her mind. She hadn't known when she took the mop and the cleaning cart and the job that paid barely enough to keep a roof over her head, that the knowledge would be needed here, that it would matter here, that it would change anything. But it had. And the look on Ethan Walker's face as he held those documents and looked at her, not through her, not past her, but directly at her with something close to awe, told her that whatever came next, the person who cleaned the floors would never be invisible again. Nobody moved for a full 30 seconds. That's not an exaggeration. Ethan stood holding the documents with both hands. Dale stood behind him, not breathing, and Claire stood to the left of the motorcycle with grease on her fingertips, and her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. The music from Dale's speaker kept playing, some old country station, a man singing about a woman and a highway, and the absolute normalcy of that sound against the weight of what was happening in that bay felt almost surreal. Then Dale said, "Put those back." Ethan looked at him. "Not forever," Dale said quickly, holding up one hand. "Just not out in the open, not here, not right now." He looked toward the shop entrance, toward the bay doors that faced the parking lot, toward the two other mechanics on the far side of the building. His voice dropped another register. "If what you're saying is true, Ethan, if this is what it looks like, then we don't know yet who else knows this bike is here. We don't know who's been watching." Claire felt it before she understood it, a slow, cold shift in the atmosphere of the room, like the temperature dropping without any visible reason. She looked at Dale, she looked at the bay doors, and she thought about the last 6 weeks, about all the specialists who had come and gone, about the names Ethan had called, about the people who had touched this motorcycle and declared it a mystery and walked away. "The experts," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "The ones you brought in, how many of them knew where the bike was being kept?" Ethan turned to look at her slowly. "All of them," he said. The words sat in the air between them like smoke. Dale was the one who moved first. He walked to the bay doors, not running but fast, the kind of walk that doesn't want to become a run, and pulled them down manually. The daylight narrowed and disappeared. The overhead shop lights took over, fluorescent and cold, and suddenly making the space feel smaller than it had 60 seconds ago. "We need to read everything," Ethan said. He was recovering. You could see it happening in real time, the businessman, the professional, the man who had built something real over 30 years, reasserting himself over the shock. "Before we do anything else, we need to know exactly what we have." He carried the documents to his office. Claire and Dale followed. He closed the door behind them. The glass walls meant the other mechanics could see them, but sound didn't carry through. He spread the papers on his desk. There were 11 documents total. 7 were photocopies of auction certificates, official-looking, stamps signed for motorcycles sold through an organization called the American Heritage Collectors Consortium, a name Claire didn't recognize. But that made Dale go very still the second he read it. 3 were handwritten ledger pages, columns of figures and codes and dates going back nearly 30 years. And 1 was a letter. Handwritten 3 pages signed at the bottom with a name that meant nothing to Claire, but clearly meant something to Ethan because he read the signature and sat down heavily in his chair without saying a word. "Who is that?" Claire asked. Ethan looked up at her. He looked at Dale. Dale's jaw was tight. "Gerald Marsh," he said. "He was one of the founders of the AHCC, the American Heritage Collectors Consortium, one of the most respected figures in vintage motorcycle collecting for about 25 years. A pause. "He died in 2019. They named an award after him." "They named an award after a man who wrote that letter," Ethan said. His voice was completely flat. "What does the letter say?" Claire asked. Ethan looked at it again. He read silently for a moment, and then he read aloud. Not the whole thing, just sections, his voice low and measured, and carrying the particular quality of a man reading something he wishes he could unread. The letter described a system, a coordinated decades-long operation in which collector motorcycles, genuine, rare, valuable machines, were being cycled through fraudulent auction processes. Bikes that had been stolen were given false provenance documents. Bikes with fabricated histories were certified as authentic by experts who were being paid to certify them. Restoration certificates, the documents that established a machine's authenticity and condition and were the primary basis for its valuation, were being manufactured wholesale and sold to buyers who had no idea they were purchasing forgeries. And the money involved was not small. The ledger pages alone, if Claire was reading the columns correctly, represented transactions totaling somewhere north of $40 million on over a 20-year period. When Ethan finished reading, the office was silent. Then Claire said, "Why was this hidden in the Harley?" It was the right question. Ethan looked at her with something that might have been appreciation. The bike's original owner, Ethan said slowly, thinking it through as he spoke. The Hollywood actor. He must have found out somehow and put this inside the frame as what insurance evidence, something to hold over them. And then he sold the bike, Dale said, or he died before he could use it. And whoever put the evidence here either lost track of it or assumed the bike would never be examined closely enough for anyone to find the compartment. A show bike, never ridden, never serviced, just displayed. Until I decided to start it up in front of 400 people, Ethan said. His tone had something bleak in it now. Not self-pity. Ethan Walker didn't seem like a man who had much room for self-pity, but a clear-eyed recognition of how a single decision had set something much larger in motion. The sabotage, Claire said. Someone knew what was in the frame, and when you announced you were going to display the bike publicly, they got nervous. Because a running bike gets serviced. A serviced bike gets examined. An examined bike. She stopped. Let the logic complete itself. Someone made sure it wouldn't run, Dale finished, and then they waited to see what would happen. And what happened, Ethan said, looking directly at Claire, is that the one person nobody was watching figured it out anyway. Claire held his gaze for a second. Then she looked away at the documents spread across the desk at the small metal case that was still latched, that none of them had opened yet. What's in the case, she said. Nobody had touched it. It sat at the edge of the desk, dull silver, simple latch, the size of something you'd carry rings in, or a very small amount of something you wanted to protect. All three of them looked at it simultaneously, the way people look at something they're not sure they want to open, because opening it makes the thing inside real. Ethan reached over and unlatched it. Inside was a USB drive, modern enough to have been placed there in the last 15 years. Not part of the original concealment, in a strip of paper with a handwritten web address and an 8-digit code. Someone updated it, Dale said immediately. Someone knew about the original compartment, opened it at some point, and added this. Someone who was already inside, Claire said. Someone who had access to the bike before Ethan bought it. Ethan picked up the USB drive and held it between two fingers looking at it. We can't open this here, he said. Not on any computer connected to anything. My laptop is off-grid, Claire said. Both men looked at her. I mean, I don't have internet at my place. I can't afford it. And the laptop is old, no wireless card. It's as offline as you're going to get. Another pause. Another moment where the two men recalibrated their understanding of the person standing across the desk from them. Where do you live? Ethan asked. It cost her something to answer. She could feel it in her chest, the familiar grinding shame of poverty that never quite becomes something you're used to no matter how long it's your reality. I have a room, she said. Over on Kessler, single-room shared bath. It's fine. Ethan nodded once without judgment. Then that's where we go tonight, he said. All three of us. 8 o'clock. Nobody talks about this before then. Nobody mentions what we found. Nobody. He looked at Dale. Agreed. Dale nodded. His expression had settled into something resolute. The earlier skepticism burned completely away by the weight of what was now sitting on this desk. Agreed, all right, he said. But Ethan, I want to say something first. Say it. Dale looked at Claire. Not through her, at her the same way Ethan had started doing, with the full attention of someone who has just fundamentally revised their understanding of a person. I've worked in this industry for 41 years, he said. I've worked with some of the best people in it. And I missed what you found. I missed it badly. I want you to know that I understand what that means. Claire waited. It means you're not the janitor here anymore, Dale said. Whatever happens next, I'm not calling you the janitor anymore. It was a small thing. It was an enormous thing. Claire felt something shift in her chest, hot and sudden, and she pressed her lips together hard and nodded once and did not let herself look away from his face, because looking away would have meant admitting that it mattered more than she wanted it to. Thank you, she said. They put the document back in the oilcloth. They put the oilcloth back in the compartment. Claire refitted the concealed panel with the same precision she'd used to open it, and when she was finished, the frame looked exactly as it had before, unblemished, perfectly original, giving away nothing. She kept the USB drive in the strip of paper. She tucked them into the front pocket of her jeans underneath the hem of her sweatshirt. Then she picked up her mop and went back to work. Because that was the brilliant, terrible, practical thing about being invisible. She could put the tools of one world down and pick up the tools of another, and no one watching would think anything at all had changed. But everything had changed. She knew it with every push of the mop across the concrete floor. She could feel it in her hands, the ghost of the pick tool, the precision of those 22 minutes, the click of the panel releasing, and underneath that feeling was something she hadn't let herself feel in a very long time. Not since her father's funeral. Not since the shop went under and the creditors came and the life she'd known collapsed around her like a building losing its foundation. She felt like herself. The real self, the one her father had built, lesson by lesson, year by year, in a small garage in Wisconsin, where the winters were brutal and the work was exact and the standard was always the same. If it isn't right, do it again. She pushed the mop and she thought about her father, and she did not cry because she had learned a long time ago that crying was a luxury that required privacy and time, and she had neither right now. What she had was a USB drive in her pocket, and the knowledge that 6 weeks of everyone else failing to see what she saw had just opened a door that someone very powerful had worked very hard to keep shut. She thought about that. She thought about what Dale had said, "We don't know who's been watching." She thought about the parade of experts who had come through this shop, touched this bike, and left with nothing. And she thought about the one possibility that nobody had said out loud yet, the one that had been sitting in the corner of her mind since the moment Ethan's face had gone pale reading that letter. What if one of those experts hadn't left with nothing? What if one of them had come here specifically to make sure the bike stayed broken and had stayed just long enough to confirm that no one had found the compartment? She pushed the mop in a long, slow arc across the floor. She needed tonight to come faster. At 4:45, as she was wrapping up her shift and putting the cleaning supplies away, her phone buzzed. A number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer. She almost never answered numbers she didn't recognize because most of the calls she got from unknown numbers were creditors, and she'd learned to let those go to voicemail. But something made her answer. She pressed the phone to her ear. Silence. 2 full seconds of silence. And then a voicemail low deliberately altered in some way, the kind of flat, textureless quality that comes from speaking through a cloth or cupping a hand over the receiver. "You found something bung today," the voice said. "Put it back. Forget it. Walk away from that shop and don't go back." The line went dead. Claire stood completely still in the supply closet with the mop handle against her shoulder and her phone still pressed to her ear, listening to the silence where the voice had been. Her heart was going very fast. Her hands were steady. She noticed both of those things separately and filed them away. They had been watched. Not later, not eventually today. In the time between finding the compartment and 5 o'clock, someone had found out. Someone who had her phone number, which meant someone who had access to information about her that she had not given to anyone at this job except the HR form she'd filled out on her first day. Her HR file. Someone had gone into the shop's records, which meant someone with access to those records, which meant someone connected to this business or connected to someone connected to this business had made a phone call in the last 6 hours. She put the phone in her pocket. She put it next to the USB drive. She did not call Ethan. She did not text Dale. Because if someone had access to the shop's HR records, she couldn't be certain anymore about what else they had access to. She finished her shift. She clocked out. She walked to her car, a 12-year-old Honda with a cracked dashboard and a heater that worked approximately 60% of the time, and she sat in it for 3 full minutes watching the parking lot before she started the engine. Nobody followed her, or if they did, they were better at it than she could detect. She drove home. She ate something crackers and peanut butter, the kind of dinner that stops feeling embarrassing after long enough, and she sat on the edge of her bed with the USB drive in her hand and the laptop open on the mattress beside her, and she waited for 8 o'clock. At 7:58, headlights swept across her window. She was at the door before the knock came. Ethan walked in first. He had the look of a man who had spent the afternoon in a controlled state of barely contained urgency. Everything precise, everything measured, the discipline visible in how carefully he was moving, how deliberately he was speaking, as if he'd been rehearsing composure since 5 o'clock. Dale came in behind him. He had a paper bag with 3 coffees from the gas station on the corner, because Dale was at his core a practical man who understood that whatever was about to happen would go better with caffeine. Claire held up her phone before either of them spoke. She showed Ethan the unknown number in her call log. She told them what the voice had said, word for word. Ethan and Dale exchanged a look, the kind of look that 2 people exchange when the thing they were most afraid of turns out to be true. "They know we found it," Dale said. "They knew within hours," Claire said. "Which means someone in the shop," Ethan said. His voice was very quiet. "Or someone with access to the shop." My HR file had my number, Claire said. It's the only place it exists in connection with this building. Ethan sat down on the single chair Claire's room contained. Dale leaned against the wall. The room was small enough that the three of them filled it. Marcus Webb, Ethan said suddenly. Claire looked at him. The specialist from Denver. He was the only one who asked to see the employment records. Ethan's jaw tightened. He said he wanted to know if any former employees might have tampered with the bike. I thought it was thorough. I let him look. The silence that followed had a specific texture. It was the silence of a puzzle piece clicking into a place you didn't want it to go. He's connected to the AHCC, Dale said. His voice was slow, like he was working something out in real time. I know that because I saw his name in one of the auction certificates. I was going to say something, but I thought it might mean nothing. Plenty of good people have bought through them. He stopped. But if he came here not to diagnose the bike, but to confirm no one had found what was inside it, and when we did find it, Claire said he already had my number. The three of them sat with that. Then Claire picked up the laptop. She inserted the USB drive. One folder. Inside the folder, 47 files. Some were scanned documents detailed high-resolution scans of what appeared to be internal communications financial records, shipping manifests. Some were audio files. And at the very top of the folder, a single text document simply titled, "Read this first." Claire opened it. The document was 3 paragraphs. Whoever had written it was not identified by name, but they wrote with the clarity of someone who understood they might not be alive to explain things in person and who wanted to make absolutely certain the record survived them. The 3rd paragraph ended with a sentence that made Ethan put his coffee down on the floor very carefully, like he was afraid of breaking something. It said, "The operation is still active. The people running it are known and trusted in the collector community. Several of them have at one time or another been guests in your home." Ethan read it twice. Then he looked up at the ceiling. He breathed once slowly through his nose. He looked at Claire. "I need you to understand something," he said. "What we have found, what you found, this is not going to be simple. These are not small people. They have money and reputation and lawyers and connections to this industry going back 30 years. When this comes out," he paused, "and it will come out. I'm going to make sure it comes out. But when it does, everything in that folder is going to point back to this room, to this building, to you." Claire met his eyes. She didn't look away. "I've been invisible my whole adult life," she said. "Nobody looked at me when I was cleaning your floors. Nobody saw me. Now they see me. And yeah, that's dangerous." She glanced at the USB drive still in the laptop port. "But my father spent 16 years making me good enough to find what nobody else could find. If I walk away from this, then that was all for nothing." Dale from against the wall said quietly, "Ray Dawson would be proud of you." It almost broke her. She felt that sentence go through her like a physical thing, hot and sharp and enormous. She kept her face even. She pressed her hands flat on her knees. "Then we go forward," she said. Ethan nodded once. "We go forward," he said. Outside somewhere on Kessler Street, a car had been parked for the past 40 minutes, with its engine off and its lights dark in a spot that had a direct line of sight to the window of a single rented room on the 2nd floor of a building that nobody important had ever had any reason to notice. But inside that room, 3 people were looking at 47 files that were about to change that. The car outside didn't move until 11:43. Claire saw it from the edge of her window, just the outline of it, parked in that particular way that has nothing casual about it, the way a car sits when someone inside it is waiting rather than resting. She'd noticed it 40 minutes earlier and hadn't said anything because she didn't want to stop what they were doing, and because some part of her had already accepted that being watched was now simply a condition of her life. The way poverty had been a condition and grief had been a condition, things you absorbed and kept moving through. When it finally pulled away, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "It's gone," she said. Ethan looked up from the laptop. He'd been reading audio file transcripts. 47 files had turned out to contain multitudes, and they'd been working through them for nearly 2 hours, and his face had been getting progressively grimmer with each one, the way a man's face gets when the world he thought he understood keeps revealing itself to be something darker than he knew. "For now," Dale said from the wall. He hadn't moved from that spot in an hour. He had his arms crossed and his coffee long since cold, and the expression of a man running a very careful internal calculation. "They know we have the drive. They're not going to stop watching. Then we have to move faster than they expect us to," Claire said. She pulled the laptop toward herself and opened the audio files. She'd been saving them. Some instinct told her the audio was where the real weight was. The documents were evidence, but voices were confession. And now she put in the single earbud she owned, the left one, the right one having died 6 months ago, and she pressed play on the first file. The recording was poor quality but audible. Two men talking the kind of conversation that has a slightly too casual rhythm of people who believe they are not being recorded. One voice she didn't recognize. The other, she pulled the earbud out and looked at Ethan. Do you know a man named Patterson, first name Robert? Goes by Bobby. Ethan went completely still. Bobby Patterson, he said, not a question. Stating the name the way you state something you need to verify is real. He's on this recording, Claire said, talking about a 1971 Superglide that was sold through the AHCC in 2014. He's describing how the provenance documentation was built, who signed it, how much each signature cost. Ethan stood up. He walked to the window, the same window Claire had been watching the street from, and he stood with his back to them for a moment. His hands were at his sides. His shoulders were very straight, the way shoulders get when the body is working to contain something the mind hasn't fully processed yet. Bobby Patterson is my oldest friend in this industry, he said. We've known each other for 26 years. He came to my daughter's wedding. Dale said nothing. Claire said nothing. There was no good version of a response to that sentence, and they both understood it. He was one of the experts you called, Claire said quietly. It wasn't a question either. Week 2, Ethan said, still facing the window. He spent 3 days here, had full access to the bike. And he told you nothing was wrong, Dale said. He told me the electrical system appeared to have an inexplicable fault that he'd never seen before and couldn't diagnose. Ethan laughed once, a short, humorless sound. He was very apologetic about it, said it was the damnedest thing. Claire listened to 20 seconds more of the audio. Bobby Patterson's voice was confident in the recording, relaxed the voice of a man conducting ordinary business. He was describing in precise detail how to fabricate a restoration certificate that would pass inspection from any expert in the country, because the experts who would be inspecting it were already part of the arrangement. She took the earbud out again. Ethan, he turned. He wasn't apologizing because he couldn't find the fault, she said. He was apologizing because he'd already confirmed the compartment hadn't been found. He came here to check. He left satisfied. The room absorbed that. Ethan walked back to the chair and sat down. He put his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands for exactly 4 seconds. She counted, and then he lifted his head, and his expression was the clearest it had been all night. Grief processed and set aside. Decision made. How much of this is enough to take to federal investigators, he asked. I don't know, Claire said honestly. I'm not a lawyer, but 47 files, financial records going back 30 years, audio of people describing the operation in their own words. It's a lot. We need someone we trust, Dale said. Someone outside this industry. Someone with no connection to the AHCC or anyone in it. I have a brother-in-law, Ethan said. He's a retired federal prosecutor. Lives in Billings. I haven't spoken to him in 2 years because he and my sister have been... He stopped, waved that away. That doesn't matter right now. He's clean, completely outside this world, and he'll know exactly who to call. Call him tonight, Claire said. It's 11:30. Ethan, she held his gaze. There was a car outside my window for 40 minutes. Call him tonight. He called him. The conversation lasted 19 minutes. Claire and Dale heard one side of it, Ethan's measured, precise summary of what they'd found, the way he described the documents, and the audio files, the way his voice changed slightly when he said Bobby Patterson's name and then went level again immediately. When he hung up, he had an address in Billings and a time 7 the next morning. He wants to see everything, Ethan said. Physical documents, the drive, all of it. And he paused. He said, don't go anywhere alone tonight. Any of us. Dale looked at Claire's room. The single bed, the single chair, the window with its imperfect line of sight to the street. She's coming home with me, Dale said. It was not a suggestion, and it wasn't a question. My wife is a light sleeper, and we have a dog that takes his job very seriously. Nobody comes near that house without us knowing. Claire started to say something. Dale cut her off, not unkindly. You found this. You opened the compartment, and you fixed the bike, and you are the reason we know any of what we know tonight. You are not sleeping alone in a room where a strange car was parked outside your window for 40 minutes. He picked up his gas station coffee bag from the floor. Pack what you need, let's go. She packed in 6 minutes. She had practiced over the last 3 years becoming a person who could pack in 6 minutes. She didn't own much. The laptop, the USB drive, a change of clothes, the folder with her father's restoration notes, a battered spiral-bound notebook she'd carried through every bad stretch of the last 4 years, her father's handwriting dense and precise on every page, the one thing she had never sold and would never sell. She tucked it under her arm. She turned off the light. She left. Ethan drove separately. They didn't use their phones to communicate Dale had made that call, and nobody argued with it. They drove in two cars, one following the other, to Dale's house on the east side of town, where Dale's wife Margaret answered the door in her robe with the uncomplicated welcome of a woman who has been married to a mechanic for 34 years and understands that emergencies are part of the job. Margaret made coffee without being asked. She set up the guest room without asking questions. She looked at Claire, the worn clothes, the spiral notebook, the careful way Claire held herself like someone used to taking up as little space as possible, and she said simply, "You look like you could use a meal that isn't crackers." Claire opened her mouth to say she was fine. Margaret was already in the kitchen. They worked until 2 in the morning. Ethan and Dale and Claire at Dale's kitchen table going through the 47 files methodically, Margaret refilling coffee cups without being asked. The dog, a large, deeply serious German shepherd named Frank, patrolling the perimeter of the house in slow, regular loops that were profoundly reassuring. They made a document of their own. Claire typed, she was fast, another thing like the tool knowledge and the eye for original finishes that nobody would have expected from the woman who cleaned the floors. She organized the evidence into a coherent sequence, a narrative that a prosecutor could follow that would tell the story of a 30-year fraud in the order it had actually happened, rather than the order they discovered it. At 1:15, she opened audio file number 23. She put in the earbud. She listened for 40 seconds. She took the earbud out and put the laptop on the table facing Ethan without saying a word. He put the earbud in. He listened. Then he pulled the earbud out slowly, and the look on his face was different from anything that had been there before tonight. Not grief, not anger, not the clear-eyed determination that had replaced them. Something older and quieter and harder to name. "That's Gerald Marsh," he said, "the founder, the one the award is named after." "I know," Claire said. "Keep listening." He put the earbud back in. Another 30 seconds. When he took it out this time, he set it on the table with the precision of a man setting down something fragile. "He's talking about my shop," Ethan said. "He's describing Walker Restoration specifically, by name." A pause. "He's saying that if the Harley ever surfaces in a legitimate restoration context, the compartment needs to be accessed and cleared before anyone finds it. And he's saying he stopped. He's saying who's responsible for making sure that happens," Claire said. Ethan nodded. "Bobby Patterson," Dale said. Not a question. "Bobby Patterson," Ethan confirmed. The kitchen was very quiet. Frank the dog came in from his patrol, looked at the three of them, and went back out. Margaret topped off the coffee cups and went to bed quietly, understanding that what was happening at her table was not something she needed to witness, but that the people at it needed to be able to witness each other. 26 years, Ethan said. To no one in particular. To the room. To the version of the last 26 years that had just been fundamentally rewritten. "He came to my daughter's wedding." He gave a toast. He pressed 2 fingers against his forehead briefly. It was a good toast. "I'm sorry," Claire said. "Don't be." His voice was sharp, but not at her. "Don't be sorry. This is clarity. I'll take clarity." He picked up his coffee. "What else is on that drive?" At 2 in the morning, Claire found the file that changed the scope of everything. It was buried in a subfolder inside another subfolder, the kind of nesting that is either organizational habit or deliberate concealment. A scanned document, 11 pages. She started reading and stopped at page 3 and said, "Ethan, Dale, read this." They read it. The document was an internal assessment prepared by someone within the AHCC, author unknown, dated 8 years earlier, listing the organizations and institutions that had knowingly or unknowingly been affected by fraudulent transactions. The list included 14 major collector organizations across 9 states. It included 3 museums that had acquired motorcycles with falsified provenance. It included 2 university collections, and at the bottom in a section titled Primary Facilitation Channels, it included a short list of restoration shops whose certificates of authenticity had been used to legitimize fraudulent restorations. Walker Restoration and Classics was not on the list, but 6 other shops were. Shops that Claire and Dale both recognized. Shops run by people Ethan knew, had worked alongside, had trusted. Are they victims or participants? Dale asked. Some of both, probably, Ethan said. That's how these things work. You get the legitimate people to certify something, once tell them it's above board, use their name to establish the pattern. Then you have leverage. They've certified it now. Pulling back becomes almost as damaging as continuing. He looked at the list, but some of them knew, some of them had to know. One of them, Claire said, pointing to a name near the middle of the list, called you 3 weeks ago about the Harley. Ethan looked where she was pointing. Rick Solano, he said. His voice went flat. What did he want? Dale asked. He had heard the bike was giving us trouble. He offered to send someone. I told him we had it handled. Ethan set the document down. He called back 4 days later. I didn't return the call. He was checking the status, Claire said. Same as Bobby Patterson, different method. The implications of that spread through the room like water spreading across a floor, slow and inevitable, and getting into everything. This is bigger than one operation, Dale said. This is a network. Multiple shops, multiple auction houses, multiple experts. All coordinated, all protected by each other. And they've been operating for 30 years, Ethan said, because anyone who got close enough to see it either